So what's the best FOV setting in Escape from Tarkov? According to a recent poll I did, 62% of you prefer it to be maxed out, while only 5% of you are using it at the default settings the developers designed the whole game to be around. And you might be thinking that this is all personal preference, that there are no objective pros or cons to any given setting, but you're very wrong about that, and I'm going to prove it in this video. Tarkov has a lot of serious bugs and issues at certain FOVs, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you probably don't even know about. So let's dive in. Now, as always, you guys, I do work hard on these videos, so if you get something out of them, all I ask is that you consider dropping the video a like and subscribe to see more content from me in the future. Doing so ensures this video gets seen by more people and will help me and the channel out a lot. Also, if any of you are looking to people to play with, come join my Discord server. We've had about 50 people join over the last few weeks, and just about every day people are teaming up from all over the world, and it's really cool. And of course, I do stream on Twitch, so come drop by, give me a follow, and catch me live. All of my links are in the description below. So with all that said, let's get some basics out of the way as fast as possible. Your field of view is a measurement of how much you can see of the game world on your screen at any given moment, and is traditionally measured in degrees. Most games measure this horizontally, with common values ranging from an FOV of 60 all the way up to 120. Some games go higher, some lower. Console games tend to stick to something between 60 to 75 because these games expect you to be sitting on your couch in front of the television several feet away, while most PC gamers tend to be more comfortable around 90 degrees or higher since they're sitting much closer to their screens. This gives a much more natural view and helps combat motion sickness, which a lot of gamers are susceptible to. However, Escape from Tarkov measures your field of view vertically. So when you see a range of 50 to 75, don't freak out. It doesn't mean you're stuck to crappy console vision on a PC game. An FOV of 50 in Tarkov converts to around 79 when measured horizontally. The max of 75 converts to around 107. If you're comfortable at 90 in most games, that converts to about 59 in Tarkov. And if you're coming from, say, PUBG or something where the max FOV is 103, that's about 71 in Tarkov. In the description below, I'll post a link to a website where you can do your own conversions if that will help you. Now, intuitively, it may seem obvious to use the highest FOV possible. After all, being able to see more has to be superior to being able to see less, especially in an FPS, right? Well, sure, sometimes, but you gotta understand that increasing your FOV doesn't increase the size of your monitor. So when you increase your FOV, the game has to somehow show you more of the world using the exact same screen space, and it can really only do this in one way, by stretching the hell out of everything. The distortion effects aren't subtle either. Here's a simple test you can do. Drop to 50 FOV and take a look at something, screenshot it, then turn as far as you can while still keeping the object in frame right at the edge of your screen, and then take another screenshot. Then do the same thing at 75 FOV. I did one here and discovered several things. At 50 FOV, the graffiti gets stretched by 38%, a bit, but not a ton. At 75 FOV, it gets stretched by 106%. That's more than double the size and is almost 3 times the stretch of the 50 FOV. Now, the distortion at the sides is weird, but won't necessarily hinder your gameplay. However, what's far worse is when you look at the object head on, it's about 40 to 50% smaller at 75 FOV versus 50, depending on how far away the target is from you. The further the target actually is, the worse the stretch becomes and the smaller the object is. A target being half the size because of your FOV means you're twice as likely to miss them. Actually, it's worse when you consider the volume of your target. Compare these two targets. This one at 50 FOV has 66 pixels to aim at. 4 of those are headshots. The exact same target at the same exact distance, but at FOV 75 only has 13 pixels to aim at, and only 1 is a headshot. That means you're 4 times less likely to be able to score a headshot on them and 5 times less likely to hit them at all. But guess what? It's even worse than that. Look at the size of the red dot reticule. At 50 FOV, it's about 8 pixels in diameter, while the man is about 13 pixels tall. This means if you put your red dot over him, you have a little leeway with your ability to hit him. It also means you'll be able to see him even with your red dot over him. Meanwhile, at 75 FOV, your red dot is about 6 pixels in diameter, and the man is only about 6 pixels tall himself. So when you aim at him, not only do you not have any leeway, but your red dot will completely cover him up, making it really hard to keep him in your sights. Maybe you think this isn't a problem. Maybe you've lied to yourself and you believe you can shoot someone who is 6 pixels tall just as easily as you can someone who's 13 pixels tall. Well, you also got to consider just how much more difficult it's going to be to spot that player when they're that much smaller. Consider the previous examples. Is it going to be easier to spot 66 pixels moving across your screen in and out of cover, or just 13? Obviously, the more pixels, the more color variations there's going to be, the more definition, and the easier it's going to be to spot them. But maybe you're an eagle-eyed aimbot and you think none of this applies to you. Well, there's one other thing you might consider, which is that there are numerous bugs with many red dot sights in the game when you increase your FOV. Some no longer line up with where your bullets will actually go. Some get thrown off with motion, with walking, with leaning, and so on. Also, it's been widely reported by other YouTubers and on Reddit that when aiming with red dots at medium to long ranges, your FOV will throw your bullet's trajectory off, making it much less accurate than normal. Okay, so what am I saying? That you should all switch to the minimum FOV of 50? Well, no, but I took a poll recently to see what FOV you all use, and I think it's interesting that only 5% of you do use the minimum FOV, while a whopping 63% of you max it out. I've looked at other polls done in the past, and these results seem about standard. What's interesting is that the developers of the game seem to have built the game for 50 FOV, and a lot of bugs are getting introduced when you don't stick to it, most of which pertain to throwing your aim off. So combine bugs that make your sights and lasers unreliable with the fact that your actual targets are up to half the size as normal, making them harder to hit or even spot, and this all stacks up to a pretty big case against using max FOV, yet most of you are doing exactly that. But as usual with everything I do, nothing is that simple. It turns out that there are numerous cons against using the minimum FOV as well. The obvious one is you can't see as much around you. How much less do you see when you're using the minimum versus the maximum FOV? About this much. That's about 40% less than normal when measured from either axis. That's a lot of information to miss out on, even if it would be distorted. But that's not all. In my tests, using a higher FOV actually resulted in a slightly higher frame rate, up to 6 FPS higher in high foliage and grassy areas. Not a massive improvement, but it is interesting that being able to see more of the game will improve your FPS somewhat, because you'd probably assume that it's the opposite. My guess is because of the heavy distortion at higher FOVs, the game renders less detail of leaves and pieces of grass, which takes some pressure off of your computer. And then there's arguably the best reason of all that stuff I mentioned about red dots and lasers earlier being glitchy and less accurate at max FOV is completely negated by using scopes with any zoom at all. In fact, using a variable zoom scope that drops down to 1x will not suffer these issues either. In fact, scopes actually get some pretty big benefits at higher FOVs. For one, the higher your FOV, the larger your scope becomes, and you get a larger field of view on the scope itself, letting you see more of the area around your target. Then on top of this, I've noticed really bad vignetting around the scope at lower FOVs. Take everybody's favorite scope, for instance, the Valde. I think it's everybody's favorite scope because everybody's using it at higher FOVs where it's super large, has the profile of a slim red dot, has super thin, clear lines, and zero vignetting around the edge of the scope. It's probably the clearest sight picture in the entire game, but only at higher FOVs. At the minimum FOV, the scope is actually very small with a crazy amount of vignetting that actually reduces the sight picture to less than half of what you can see at higher FOVs. And look at this picture. I'm pretty sure the targets are getting slightly bigger at higher FOVs as well. At 75 FOV, the target is 101 pixels tall, while at 50 FOV, he seems to be only around 80. The head of the 50 FOV one is 13 pixels tall, while the 75 FOV one is 18. This is a huge difference and is significantly better for higher FOVs. And for some portion of the population, low FOV actually causes severe motion sickness. I personally suffer from this, and I know that below about 59 FOV, I start suffering from nausea and pretty bad headaches. This is far more common than some of you might realize if you don't suffer from it. And for those of you who are affected by this, low FOV might just not be possible for you without severe discomfort. Okay, so this whole situation is kind of scuffed, isn't it? If your FOV is too low, you won't be able to see as much of your surroundings. You might drop as much as 6 FPS. You might suffer motion sickness, and your sight pictures with zoom scopes is much worse, and enemies will appear smaller, making them harder to hit. But if your FOV is too high, enemies directly in front of you will appear as much as half the size as normal, making them harder to spot and much harder to hit. And if you're using red dot sights, the game is going to bug out and make it harder for you to line up your shots, making it significantly harder for you to actually hit your targets, on top of them already being half the size, doubly impacting you. And your sights are actually going to be smaller at high FOVs versus low, even though your scopes appear larger. And while you will be able to see more of your surroundings, those surroundings are going to appear stretched and distorted. So what should you do? Switch between FOVs depending on what gun you're taking in? No, I don't think that's a good idea at all. You should probably get used to seeing the game in a way that's comfortable for you and then stick with it. At 75 FOV, you can probably get used to spotting enemies, even if they are smaller. You might not be as good at it as you would at 50 FOV, but I imagine if you're bouncing back and forth between the two, you'll never get used to anything. So there's a third third option that's pretty obvious, and it's probably the one I would recommend. It's the one I use, and that is to pick an FOV somewhere in the middle. An FOV of 59 in Tarkov equates to about 90 in most other games. A lot of PC gamers are pretty comfortable here. Personally, I go a little higher to 63, which is dead center of the spectrum and equates to about 94 FOV in most games. I'm not saying this is the best, but I'd suggest you pick an FOV somewhere between 59 and 71. Experiment and see what feels the most comfortable to you. To give you some comparison of my FOV of 63 and the minimum and the maximum, here you go. You can see that the scope size isn't much larger than it is at 50, but the vignetting is completely gone, giving me a nice clear sight picture. The red dots are sort of the opposite, a bit smaller than 50 FOV, but still giving me a much larger image than 75. When it comes to the accuracy bugs found at using anything other than the 50 FOV, this does exist at 63 FOV too. Pretty much exists at anything other than 50, but it's far more manageable than at 75. The FPS dip is also halved at about 1 to 3 FPS versus about 2 to 6, which is barely noticeable. And personally, I've had zero issues with motion sickness at 63 FOV. So what's the solution? Well, personally, I feel like half of the problems I revealed to you here come down to bugs that will eventually get sorted out. The red dot accuracy bugs, the changing in the vignetting of the various scopes, probably even the difference of FOV when looking down the scopes, I think we can all agree none of this is likely intentional by the developers. Assuming it eventually gets worked out, then all the issue really comes down to is it better to be able to see more of your surroundings or be able to double the size of your enemies, making them twice as easy to spot and shoot? Personally, I think this comes down to personal preference. A lot of Tarkov comes down to audio, and so being able to spot people, at least in some circumstances, can be mitigated by listening. But a lot of the maps are big, and being able to spot someone out of the corner of your eye who might be really far away is also very important. So being able to see more is extremely useful too. But your enemies being easier to hit is always a positive thing. And while skill at the game can definitely help mitigate this too, you can't possibly argue that it's just as easy for anyone to hit a target half the size of another target. So it really comes down to, what do you want to prioritize? I think there are valid arguments for each. For me personally, I think going somewhere in the middle and taking a balance of all the strengths, but also all of the weaknesses, is probably the best option. Especially right now where we know for sure there are certain disadvantages that just get eliminated by using a slightly higher or slightly lower FOV. The vignetting, for instance, is a thing that just doesn't exist past a certain low FOV. But do I think being balanced is always the best? No, it's the best for me, I think. But if your aim in the game is so good that you can hit tiny targets with high accuracy, then being able to see more might just be better for you. If your aim sucks and you need all the help you can get, going all the way down to 50 FOV might also be best for you. Hopefully this video has given you a lot to think about. I'd love to know if it convinced you to change your FOV, so if it did or didn't, give me your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked the video, please help me out by giving the video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. If you're looking for a group to team up with, join the Discord server, and if you want to hang out with me live on stream, come drop by my Twitch channel and give me a follow. All my links are in the description below. Until next time.